Welcome to the Colorado Springs District 11 Community Dialogue presentation. My name is David Sturz with Cooperative Strategies. We've been retained by the district to facilitate this process. I'm going to go through some slides with you today and ask you some questions through a questionnaire. What you'll have is 3 sprints of a presentation followed by 6 questions each. The first sprint will cover the process itself for a facilities master plan and what it is, and your involvement as a community member, and who else is involved in their roles in the sequence of planning. We'll then ask you some basic demographic questions, but not your name, as this is anonymous. Then we will go to the second recording, which will go over the facility and demographic data that we have and can use as a basis for planning. And then we'll ask you some facility planning priority questions. And then finally, the third and final recording will look at attendance data, where students live versus where they attend. We'll ask you the remaining 6 questions there that pertain to your school choice decisions and insights therein, if that's applicable to you, as well as some design considerations and general catch-all question in case we miss something you'd like to voice as a part of the process. So let's get started. We'll go right through what it is that we're doing, defining our terms, framing up what we are addressing, and how what the desired outcomes would be at a broad level, and then looking into the data. Just as we look at these outcomes, to let you know at this point, there are no defined outcomes yet for this master plan. None of the processes that we do have predefined outcomes. Our job is to work with districts and communities to look at the data, demographic, facility, and desired vision academically and strategic and otherwise, and then look at what are the opportunities given our data and our constraints and our vision, and what are the options to achieve those opportunities, and then ultimately what's the best recommended path to get there given all things considered. So as we go through, what is the facilities master plan? Is a district-wide long-term plan for facilities. We're looking at a 5+ year capital window for major investments in buildings, new construction, major renovation, systems replacements like roofs, HVAC, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, interior systems, site matters, fields and parking lots, and those kinds of things. And so we look at a 5-year horizon of what those needs are now, what the anticipated needs are coming down the pike, and what the likes or wants, want to haves are as well, lining that all up with all of our data and feedback as we go. So the overarching goals, what we're looking at is ensuring that the time these investments are done, this plan is funded and executed, that our schools would all have the same warm, safe, cool, and dry features, that we would have a baseline of equity across conditions of our schools, that our schools would be well utilized, not under. And so we are heating, cooling, and operating and spending on empty space, and not overutilized, so that we are stressing the facility and, more importantly, its occupants, the teachers and the students, and overall making sure that the goals and the outcomes of this plan are set within the district's budgets and capacities, and that ultimately this plan is not a wish list, it's not an aspirational document, it is indeed a roadmap, a plan that can be executed. And so we build it in pieces, and I'll go over those pieces here in a minute. And that includes, of course, looking at the district strategic plan and academic plan as referenced by the academic leadership that we dialogue with them throughout the process to ensure alignment. So here is the process milestones in 3 tranches. The first is collecting, analyzing data. And we've begun with a steering committee, which I'll explain in a little bit. That is a group of your peers, currently just a little over 60 folks that are advising throughout the entire process. So we've gathered the data with the district on the condition, the adequacy, which means things like, are there windows in the classrooms? Do they have sufficient electrical outlets? Do they have projection equipment? Do they have adequate furniture for the tasks of the space? That being different in an art classroom, for example, than it would be in an English classroom. So we have all the data, we have capacity data, enrollment history, enrollment projections, and we mash it up and we look at it in relation to each other. and start to get some idea, sort of like health indicators, like you would get at a doctor. What's going on with your utilization? What's going on with your condition? What's going on with the adequacy, capacity, and what are those trends? We've met with the steering committee twice to review that data. We're meeting with you all in this setting now, and getting your feedback. Once we get your feedback and we have the steering committee's feedback from our previous two meetings, we're going to sit down with the district leadership and come up with some ideas. And those are called options. We're going to develop those options to say, okay, well, given the data we have, given the feedback that we have from the community, here's potential paths A, B, C for our high schools, and D, E, F for middle schools, and so on and so forth for elementaries. We get those ideas for options, we get those refined by the steering committee, and we're coming back to you all, excuse me, to get your feedback on those options themselves for that third and final sprint of this process, which takes the mini options and refines them into a cohesive package that fits within anticipated budgets, that meets the priorities, responds to the feedback, and does all so that the entire package fits together as a whole and is cohesive in that sense, and implementable. And then along the way, as you see, board updates throughout each phase to make sure that the board is informed, in touch, and provides feedback throughout. Here is the same project plan laid out a little bit differently in more details. Feel free to pause this recording and to look at that. But you can see again the flow. It's an iterative logic to the process, data, framing, getting feedback on that, developing some options, getting feedback on that, responding to that, getting more feedback, refining those options into recommendations, getting more feedback on the recommendations through the committee before our final presentation. Okay, here again are those three overlapping groups involved. The steering committee, which advises the district throughout the process. We're looking at 6 meetings currently. They've met twice. We'll meet twice during options and twice during recommendations. District leadership meeting to help frame up the outcomes and the desired outcomes, broadly speaking, in the beginning of the process, providing the data, reviewing the data with us, developing options, and helping to refine it to recommendations, and the community providing feedback on the same through these meetings that we're having right now. We had a futures conference back in the beginning of this process prior to COVID with civic, business, and other community leaders along with district leadership to, at a very high level, frame up what are we trying to achieve? What does a learning environment for the 21st century look like in Colorado Springs? That report is available on the website as well. Okay, guiding principles. When we develop a master plan in cooperative strategies, these are our guiding principles for developing a facilities master plan. One, it should promote equity. So we are looking at that as a first and foremost from a capital investment standpoint. Our schools will be warm, safe, cool, and dry after these investments. We will take care of those priority needs at all of our schools to make sure that those are addressed first before we address the wants to haves and the nice to haves. We want to address the need to have based upon data. So it is fair, equitable, and meaningfully impacts the learning environment for all. Create the options that we have from the data that we have. So these are data-driven decisions. And the driving towards is the vision. That is vision from the community leaders through mediated to us through the Futures Conference, through conversations with district leadership, through conversations with the steering committee, through your feedback here today. We take that feedback and know that every time we receive that feedback, it meaningfully impacts the next step. This is not in a vacuum, but as we hope you'll see throughout the process, that your feedback does materially inform and meaningfully inform each next step in our data review, options development, options refinements phase. Throughout the process, we're going to release what we have once completed and reviewed. We'll put it up on the website so you can see the documentation take shape as it goes. Rather than get a dump at the end with everything prepackaged and pretty for you. You're going to see it build throughout, and then all options need to be a trade-up scenario for students, and so the best of our abilities. Looking at the data. And if we're going to look at a renovation or a repurposing of a building, a new construction or a consolidation or a boundary change or whatever it may be, to greater or lesser degrees of investment and change, the end state we look at with, will this provide a net trade up for students? So when we look at the options like changing a boundary or changing this, repurposing a school or anything like that, we look at the transportation impact. Is that going to have a negative impact on students? If so, whom, where, how much? Are there ways to mitigate those? If so, we can proceed with the option under, as long as we address those mitigation efforts. If not, then it's not an option. And that's part of the reason we do this with feedback from various committees, and so that we ensure that we keep faithful to that principle. Steering committee, it's mentioned 63 members. It's made up of teachers, students, principals, assistant principals, administrators, local civic leaders, so on and so forth. You see the target, which is what we originally went through for a profile, and the actual, what we got. We had lots of good applicants, and we're able to get a representative sampling from your district that's provide great feedback today. Here is that list of community members for transparency purposes. Now I'm going to pause and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Again, omitting names, but just telling us a little bit about your relationship to the community before we get to our next recording and our next sprint of questions.